The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft, golden light across Sarah's backyard. She stood in her cozy kitchen, cradling a steaming mug of coffee in her hands, savoring the warmth that radiated through her fingers. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. The aroma filled the air, mingling with the faint sounds of morning, a bird chirping outside, the distant hum of a car on the road, and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was a peaceful start to the day, the kind that made her feel grateful for the little things. She glanced at her small dog, Daisy, who was curled up on her favorite chair, blissfully unaware of the world outside. Just as Sarah took a moment to appreciate the calm, a sudden rustling noise broke the tranquility. It came from the backyard, loud and unexpected, almost as if something large had landed with a thud. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She set her coffee down on the countertop and stepped cautiously toward the back door, curiosity nudging her forward. What could it be? Was it a deer? Perhaps a raccoon rummaging through the trash? As she opened the door, the chill of the morning air brushed against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of her home. The sunlight flooded in, illuminating the yard, and Sarah squinted to see through the glare. She took a few tentative steps onto the porch, her pulse quickening as she scanned the area. That's when she saw them, two massive hawks perched on a wooden fence, their sharp, keen eyes fixated on the ground below. They were striking creatures, with powerful wings folded against their bodies and sharp beaks that gleamed in the sunlight. The sight was both majestic and unsettling. Wow, Sarah breathed, taking a moment to appreciate their beauty. She had always been fascinated by birds of prey, but this was different. Their presence felt ominous, as if they were watching for something, and her instincts kicked in, sensing that this was not just a simple visit from nature. The hawks were not here to admire the view, they were hunters, and her yard was their territory. As she stood on the porch, the initial awe began to morph into apprehension. Sarah remembered the whispers around the neighborhood about the increasing number of missing pets. Just last week, her neighbor had mentioned that their beloved cat had disappeared without a trace. Panic seeped into her mind as she recalled the worry in their voices and the ominous tone that had filled their conversations. The hawks didn't just land in her yard for fun, they had a purpose, and it was likely related to their need to hunt. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, half to herself and half to the hawks. Daisy stirred in her chair, yawning and stretching, oblivious to the danger that lurked just outside. Sarah's heart raced as she glanced back at her furry companion, the small dog with the wagging tail and bright eyes. The thought of Daisy being in danger sent a shiver down her spine. The hawks ruffled their feathers, their sharp eyes darting around, scanning the ground and the nearby bushes. Sarah's mind raced. What if they were searching for something small and defenseless? What if they had already claimed a victim? Her gaze drifted to the corner of the yard, where the underbrush thickened, creating a perfect hiding spot for unsuspecting critters. Panic began to bubble within her, and she instinctively called out to Daisy. "Come here, girl," she urged, waving her hands to get the dog's attention. Daisy, ever the playful pup, bounded off the chair and trotted towards Sarah, her little tail wagging furiously. As she approached, Sarah quickly scooped her up in her arms, cradling her against her chest. "We need to be careful, okay?" she said softly, feeling the warmth of Daisy's body against her. The hawks continued to watch, their heads tilting in unison as if calculating their next move. As Sarah stepped back inside, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The morning serenity had evaporated, replaced by a sense of urgency. She shut the door behind her, peering out the window to keep an eye on the hawks. They seemed unfazed by her presence, still perched high on the fence, their sharp beaks glinting in the light. A part of her wanted to go back outside, to confront the situation head-on, but another part of her urged caution. What if they were more aggressive than she anticipated? Suddenly, a loud screech echoed through the air, sending a jolt of fear through her. The hawks fluffed their feathers and took off into the sky, their powerful wings beating the air with impressive force. Sarah watched in awe as they soared above her yard, circling higher and higher until they disappeared from view. She felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. Were they leaving? Or were they just searching for something? As the adrenaline began to wear off, Sarah felt the weight of her responsibilities as a pet owner. She glanced down at Daisy, who looked up at her with curious eyes. The little dog seemed oblivious to the tension, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She needed to protect her furry friend and figure out what was happening in her neighborhood. Just then, her phone buzzed on the countertop, breaking the silence. It was a text message from her neighbor, asking if she had seen the hawks that had been spotted around the area. Sarah's stomach tightened. The hawks were indeed becoming a concern for the community. She quickly typed back, explaining what she had seen and how she was worried about the safety of her pets. As she waited for a response, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if those hawks were not just scavenging for food, but actively hunting small animals in her neighborhood? What if they were responsible for the missing pets? The idea sent shivers down her spine, and she realized she couldn't ignore the potential threat any longer. Determined to take action, Sarah quickly made a plan. She decided to call the local animal control. If the hawks were becoming a problem, they needed to be informed. With Daisy safely cradled in her arms, she grabbed her phone and dialed the number. The dispatcher answered quickly, her voice calm and professional. "Animal Control, how can I help you?" the dispatcher asked. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and I think I have a situation," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "There are 2 massive hawks in my yard, and I'm worried they might be a danger to my dog and the other pets in the area. I've heard about missing animals, and I'm really concerned." The dispatcher paused for a moment before responding, "I understand your concern. We've been getting reports about aggressive hawks in the neighborhood lately. Can you tell me what the hawks are doing? Are they attacking any pets?" Sarah glanced out the window again, looking for the hawks. "They just landed here, but they were really focused on the ground, almost like they were hunting. I'm worried they might see my dog as a target," she said, her heart racing again. "Okay, I'll send someone out to take a look. Just keep your dog indoors for now, and try to avoid approaching the hawks," the dispatcher instructed. "We'll be there as soon as we can." After hanging up, Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew she had done the right thing by calling for help, but she also felt helpless. How could something as majestic as a hawk pose such a danger? As she settled back onto the couch with Daisy, she wondered what would happen next. Would the animal control officers be able to remove the hawks? Would they even take her concerns seriously? Minutes felt like hours as she waited, the tension in the air thickening around her. Daisy snuggled closer, sensing her owner's unease. Sarah stroked the dog's soft fur, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the hawks return. But the yard remained still and quiet, as if holding its breath. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the silence, breaking the spell of anxiety that had settled over her. She hurried to the door, peering out to see the animal control truck pulling up to her driveway. A sense of hope surged within her as she opened the door, ready to explain everything to the officers. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of an unfolding drama, one that would change her perception of nature and safety forever. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah stepped outside to meet the officers, determined to protect her home and her beloved pet from the looming threat of the hawks. As Sarah stood frozen on her porch, staring at the massive hawks, her mind raced back to the recent conversations she had with her neighbors. Just last week, Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down had knocked on her door, a worried expression etched across her face. "Sarah, have you seen my cat, Mittens?" she had asked, her voice trembling. "He's been missing for 3 days now, and I'm starting to think something's wrong." At the time, Sarah had shrugged it off, assuming Mittens had simply wandered off, as cats often do. But now, standing there, she recalled how Mrs. Henderson had been nearly in tears, her eyes wide with fear. "I saw a bird circling over the yard the other day," Mrs. Henderson had continued, glancing anxiously toward the sky. "It was huge, and I swear it was watching Mittens." With a growing sense of dread, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the other pets that had gone missing in the neighborhood. Mr. Thompson's dog, a small but feisty terrier, had disappeared just a few days before Mittens. The dog's absence was met with an urgent search, but he was never found. The neighborhood had come together, calling out his name, posting signs, and checking every nook and cranny for any sign of the little creature. But the search had turned up empty, leaving everyone feeling uneasy. Just a coincidence, Sarah had thought then, but now her gut twisted at the thought of those innocent animals. What if there was more to the story? What if the hawks had claimed them as their prey? A shiver coursed through her, and she felt the weight of the situation settle heavily on her chest. She stepped back inside, the sight of the hawks unsettling her, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to understand what was happening in her yard. Sitting at her kitchen table, Sarah pulled out her laptop. She typed hawk behavior into the search engine, her heart pounding with each keystroke. The screen filled with articles and forums dedicated to raptors, their hunting patterns, and territorial behavior. She learned that hawks were incredibly skilled hunters, often swooping down to catch small mammals like rabbits, squirrels, and, in some cases, small pets. They usually stay away from humans, but if they're hungry or feel threatened, they may come closer, one article warned. Panic flooded her senses as she recalled the soft sounds of her dog, Daisy, playing outside just that morning. She could still hear Daisy's excited yips as she chased after a butterfly, blissfully unaware of the danger that now lurked just beyond the back fence. Feeling a mix of anger and fear, Sarah grabbed her phone and called Daisy's name, her voice shaky. "Daisy! Come here, girl," she called out, peeking through the window to see if her dog would respond. When Daisy trotted into view, her tail wagging and tongue lolling, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank goodness," she whispered to herself. But then she noticed something unsettling. The hawks were now circling above, their sharp cries cutting through the air. They seemed to be watching Daisy intently, and Sarah's heart sank. The more she observed, the clearer it became that the hawks weren't just hanging around for fun, they were sizing up their next meal. The realization sent a jolt of panic through her. "Stay close, Daisy," she shouted, her voice rising in urgency. Sarah hurried to the back door, her heart racing as she opened it and stepped into the yard. "Daisy, come." She waved her arms, trying to shoo the dog back toward the house. The last thing she wanted was for her beloved pet to become the target of a hungry hawk. Daisy, still oblivious to the danger, bounded toward Sarah, her playful demeanor unchanged. But the hawks began to dive lower, their massive wings casting shadows on the ground. Sarah felt a surge of fear. This isn't just a coincidence, she thought. Those hawks are here for a reason. Determined to protect her dog, she quickly pulled Daisy inside and locked the door behind her. She felt a sense of urgency wash over her as she moved to the window, peering outside. The hawks had landed again, this time on the fence, their keen eyes scanning the yard. The sight made her stomach churn, they looked so regal, yet so threatening. Desperate for information, Sarah turned back to her laptop. She needed to know how to deal with these birds and protect her home. The search results revealed various methods for deterring hawks from yards, and she began jotting down ideas. "Reflective tape, loud noises, and even decoys," she muttered, trying to gather all the information she could. She wouldn't let her home become a hunting ground. As she flipped through the pages, she stumbled upon a forum where local residents shared their experiences with hawks. One post caught her eye: "How to keep hawks away from pets." The writer described how their dog had nearly been attacked before they had installed reflective tape and noisemakers in their yard. The more Sarah read, the more anxious she became. It was clear that this was a real issue, and she needed to act quickly. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her friend Lisa, who lived a few blocks away. "Hey, have you heard about the hawks? They've been hanging around our neighborhood too. Be careful with Daisy." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It seemed like the entire community was on edge, and the reports of missing pets weren't just isolated incidents, they were part of a larger problem. She quickly replied, "I just saw 2 massive hawks in my yard. I'm freaking out. I think they might be hunting." The response was swift: "Oh no. You should call animal control or 911. They might be able to help. Sarah felt her heart race again. What if it's too late, she thought. What if I don't act fast enough? The urgency to protect Daisy grew stronger, and she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Her dog's safety was her top priority. Gathering her courage, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her heart pounding as the ringing echoed in her ears. What am I going to say? She wondered anxiously. The dispatcher answered, 911, what's your emergency? Hi. I'm Sarah, and I think I need help. There are 2 massive hawks in my yard, and I'm worried they might hurt my dog. I don't know what to do. Stay calm, the dispatcher replied reassuringly. Can you describe the situation a little more? Are the hawks aggressive? Sarah glanced out the window again, her heart racing as she observed the hawks watching her yard. I mean, they don't seem aggressive right now, but I'm scared they could be dangerous. They're just sitting there, but they've been circling a lot. The dispatcher took notes, assuring her that animal control would be dispatched to her location. We'll send someone out to investigate. In the meantime, keep your dog inside and try to stay calm. Thank you, Sarah replied, relief washing over her. She hung up and glanced at Daisy, who was curled up on the couch, blissfully unaware of the chaos outside. The thought of losing her dog made her stomach twist again. I need to do everything I can to keep her safe, she resolved. With that thought, Sarah returned to the window, determination flooding her as she watched the hawks. She could see their sharp beaks and strong talons clearly now, and she felt a shiver of apprehension. This wasn't just about her, it was about all the pets in the neighborhood. I can't let this happen, she whispered to herself, her heart racing. The gravity of the situation settled on her like a heavy blanket. The hawks weren't just birds, they were predators that had crossed into her territory. The urgency of her thoughts grew, and she began planning how she would keep Daisy safe while waiting for help to arrive. Sarah's mind raced with ideas. Maybe if I make some noise, it will scare them away, she thought. She quickly rummaged through her kitchen drawers, searching for anything that could create a loud sound. Finally, she found a small pot and a wooden spoon. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. With the pot in one hand and the spoon in the other, she stepped outside again, determination etched on her face. Okay, let's do this, she muttered, raising the pot above her head. As she struck the spoon against the pot, the loud clanging echoed through the yard, startling the hawks. To her surprise, the hawks lifted their heads, momentarily distracted by the noise. Sarah continued to bang the pot, her heart racing with hope. Come on, get out of here, she urged. At first, the hawks seemed intrigued by the sound, but then they returned their attention to the ground, as if deciding whether to stay or leave. Panic surged through her again, but Sarah refused to back down. She kept banging the pot, creating a cacophony of noise. Suddenly, one of the hawks took off, soaring into the sky. Sarah felt a flicker of triumph, but the second hawk remained, perched stubbornly on the fence. It seemed undeterred by her efforts, its fierce gaze still fixed on the yard. Why won't you go? Sarah shouted, frustration creeping into her voice. She banged the pot even harder, but the hawk simply tilted its head, seemingly unimpressed. As she continued her noisy battle, she thought about the meaning behind the hawk's presence. They were majestic creatures, symbols of power and freedom, but in this moment, they felt like intruders. Sarah realized that she needed to learn more about them to understand how to coexist without fear. With her heart racing, she glanced at Daisy, who still lay peacefully on the couch. I need to get you safe, girl, she said softly. Just then, she heard sirens approaching in the distance. The sound of animal control had arrived, and she felt a rush of relief. Help was finally on the way. Taking a deep breath, Sarah returned to the house, ready to meet the animal control officers and share her concerns. The hawks might have thrown her day into chaos, but she was determined to protect her home and her beloved dog, no matter what it took. Sarah took a deep breath, her heart racing as she cautiously stepped towards the hawks, hoping to understand what was happening. The morning sun cast a warm glow over her backyard, but the feeling in the air was anything but inviting. The two massive hawks sat perched, their sharp talons gripping the wooden fence, their keen eyes scanning the surroundings with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She felt a mix of fascination and fear. These were magnificent creatures, but their presence was unsettling. She fumbled with her phone, eager to capture this moment. Maybe it was just a curiosity. After all, hawks were a rare sight in her suburban neighborhood. Yet as she focused her camera on the birds, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way they moved, the way they fixed their gaze on the ground, it was as if they were waiting for something or someone. Her heart thudded louder in her chest, the reality of the situation dawning on her. "Stay calm, Sarah. They're just birds," she muttered to herself, trying to quell the rising unease. But she couldn't ignore the whispers she had heard from her neighbors about strange occurrences lately. Just last week, Mrs. Thompson from down the street had reported her cat missing, claiming she'd seen hawks flying overhead just before it vanished. The pieces began to fit together like a puzzle she didn't want to solve. Steeling her nerves, Sarah crept closer, the grass cool beneath her bare feet. The hawks remained undisturbed, their heads turning slightly as they regarded her with cautious curiosity. They were regal, their feathers glistening in the sunlight, a rich blend of browns and whites that seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding trees. But as she neared the edge of her yard, a flash of movement in the grass caught her eye. There, lying motionless, was a small, furry object. It took a moment for Sarah to process what she was seeing. Her heart sank as she recognized it, a rabbit, small and lifeless, its soft fur matted with dirt. A wave of nausea washed over her as realization struck. The hawks weren't just visiting, they were predators, and this little rabbit had been their meal. The sight was grim and sobering, and the implications were terrifying. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The hawks had claimed this territory as their hunting ground, and the presence of the rabbit made it all too clear why they were here. A visceral fear gripped Sarah as she thought of her own dog, Daisy, happily exploring the yard just moments earlier. Daisy was a small terrier mix, full of energy and curiosity. She was the kind of dog who would chase anything that moved. The idea of her becoming a target for these majestic but deadly hunters sent a chill through her. Feeling a surge of protectiveness, Sarah quickly scanned the yard for Daisy, who had been playing nearby. "Daisy," she called, her voice tinged with urgency. The dog, sensing the change in Sarah's tone, bounded towards her, tongue lolling out and tail wagging happily. But as she approached, Sarah's heart raced with a new kind of panic. The last thing she wanted was for Daisy to become the next meal for these hawks. Sarah crouched down, beckoning Daisy closer. "Come here, girl," she urged, her voice soft yet firm. The small dog pranced over, oblivious to the danger that lurked just beyond the fence. Sarah patted her head, feeling the warmth of her fur against her palm, grateful for her loyal companion. But as she looked back at the hawks, now eyeing them with predatory intensity, her heart sank deeper. The hawks shifted on their perches, their sharp eyes locked onto Daisy as if they could sense the dog's vulnerability. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "This isn't good," she thought. "I need to do something." The thought of losing Daisy was unbearable. She glanced around her yard, searching for anything that might help shoo the hawks away, loud noises, something shiny, anything to distract them. Max, her next-door neighbor's dog, suddenly barked loudly, adding to the commotion. The hawks fluffed their feathers, momentarily distracted, and Sarah seized the opportunity. "Daisy, let's go inside," she urged, grabbing the dog's leash from the porch. She quickly clipped it onto Daisy's collar and tugged gently, leading her towards the house. As they entered the home, Sarah couldn't shake the image of the lifeless rabbit from her mind. She needed help, and fast. Standing at the door, she peered out the window to see the hawks still watching the yard, their eyes unblinking. "What do I do?" she wondered aloud, feeling a mix of fear and determination. The hawks were a natural part of the ecosystem, but their presence here felt intrusive and dangerous. In a moment of clarity, Sarah reached for her phone. She dialed 911, her fingers trembling. The dispatcher answered promptly, and Sarah's voice was laced with urgency. "Hi, I need help. There are two massive hawks in my yard, and I'm really worried about my dog. They might attack her." The dispatcher remained calm, asking her a series of questions. "Can you describe the hawks? Are they aggressive? What's the situation like now?" Sarah struggled to find the right words, her mind racing. "They're huge and just sitting there, but they look like they're waiting for something. I don't want my dog to be in danger." After assuring her that they would send animal control to her location, the dispatcher asked Sarah to remain indoors until help arrived. She hung up, glancing back at Daisy, who seemed completely oblivious to the drama unfolding outside. "Stay close, girl," she said softly, giving Daisy a reassuring scratch behind her ears. As she waited for animal control to arrive, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. The hawks were powerful and wild, she had no control over them. She thought of the neighborhood gossip about missing pets and how quickly rumors could spread. What if her call prompted more panic among the neighbors? But more importantly, what if they couldn't help? Minutes felt like hours as Sarah paced back and forth, keeping a watchful eye on the yard. She thought about the life cycle of nature, how hawks were designed to hunt and survive, but it felt different when it was her yard and her dog at stake. How could something so beautiful also be so terrifying? Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air, pulling Sarah from her anxious thoughts. She rushed to the window, watching as an animal control truck pulled up outside her house. Relief flooded through her as the officers climbed out, ready to assess the situation. "They're here," she whispered to Daisy, who wagged her tail, blissfully unaware of the danger they had narrowly avoided. Sarah opened the front door as the officers approached, her voice a mix of urgency and gratitude. "Thank you for coming. They're just in the backyard." She led them outside, pointing towards the fence where the hawks were still perched, vigilant and watchful. "They've been here for a while, and I think they might be dangerous for my dog." The animal control officers exchanged glances, one of them nodding as they observed the scene. "We see this quite often," one officer explained. "Hawks are becoming bolder in urban areas, especially when there's an easy food source nearby." Sarah's heart sank as she realized that she might have inadvertently provided the opportunity for these hawks to thrive in her yard. "We'll need to assess their behavior and determine the best way to handle it," the officer continued, looking at Sarah with a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing by calling us. It's always better to be safe when it comes to wildlife." Feeling a little better, Sarah watched as the officers approached the hawks carefully. She could see the professionals had a plan, and she hoped they could shoo them away before they became a regular sight in her yard. As they got closer, the hawks remained unfazed, their piercing eyes fixed on the officers. The team discussed using noisemakers or visual deterrents to encourage the birds to leave. "We can't harm them, they're protected," one officer said. "But we can definitely make them uncomfortable enough to fly away." Sarah felt a rush of appreciation for the officer's knowledge and expertise. "What can I do to help?" she asked, eager to assist. "I want to make sure Daisy stays safe." "Just keep Daisy indoors for now," the officer advised. "We'll take care of the hawks. You can also help us by making some noise when we get close. It will encourage them to take off." With a newfound sense of purpose, Sarah nodded and returned to the house to grab a few pots and pans. "I'll make sure they know they're not welcome here," she declared, determination filling her voice. She banged the pots together loudly, hoping to create enough sound to startle the hawks. The officers smiled at her enthusiasm, and together they approached the fence, ready to implement their plan. Sarah clanged the pots, creating a cacophony that echoed across the yard. To her surprise, the hawks didn't budge at first, their heads turning slightly in her direction, but they didn't fly away. "Keep going," one of the officers encouraged. "They'll react soon enough." With renewed vigor, Sarah banged the pots even louder, her heart racing as she watched the hawks finally shift uneasily. She felt empowered, as if she were taking back her yard, reclaiming her space from the predatory visitors. As the noise grew, the hawks began to flap their wings, feathers rustling in the wind. With a loud screech, one of the hawks took off into the sky, soaring high above, while the second followed closely behind. Sarah stopped banging the pots, watching as they disappeared into the horizon, a sense of triumph filling her heart. "They're gone," she exclaimed, turning to the officers with a beaming smile. "We did it!" The officers laughed, impressed by her efforts. "Great job! You really showed them who's boss," one said, giving her a thumbs up. As she looked around her yard, Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The immediate danger had passed, and Daisy was safe. The hawks might have been a part of nature, but Sarah was determined to protect her home. After the officers finished their assessments, they provided Sarah with tips on keeping her yard safe in the future. Be mindful of food sources that might attract wildlife, and keep a close eye on your pets, one officer advised. Hawks are a natural part of the ecosystem, but we can coexist safely. "Thank you for all your help," Sarah said sincerely, grateful for their guidance and support. She watched as they packed up their equipment, feeling relieved but also empowered. Today had been a wake-up call, a reminder that nature was beautiful yet unpredictable. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Sarah led Daisy back inside the house. The day had been filled with unexpected challenges, but she felt stronger for having faced them head-on. Max, the scruffy dog with a heart of gold, had unwittingly brought her to this pivotal moment, and she would always remember it as a day of courage and determination. Now, as she settled onto the couch with Daisy curled up beside her, Sarah realized that she had learned an important lesson about the delicate balance of nature and the responsibilities that came with it. She was ready to protect her home, her pets, and her community, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Back in her cozy kitchen, Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest as she stared out the window at the two massive hawks perched on her backyard fence. The morning light cast long shadows across the grass, and the air was thick with tension. She couldn't shake the feeling that these birds were not just visiting her yard, but had come for a reason, a sinister reason. As she watched them, memories flooded her mind, mixing with the sound of her own rapid heartbeat. Just last week, her neighbor Mrs. Thompson had knocked on her door, her face pale and shaken. "Have you heard?" Mrs. Thompson had asked, her voice trembling. "Fluffy's gone. Just disappeared from the yard, and no one has seen her since." Fluffy was Mrs. Thompson's beloved tabby cat, known for her adventurous spirit. Sarah had felt a pang of sympathy, but now it settled like a heavy stone in her stomach. Sarah recalled the neighborhood gossip about the missing pets. First, it was Mrs. Thompson's cat, then Mr. Granger's small dog, Max, who had darted out into the street and vanished without a trace. The stories had been whispered in hushed tones during their coffee clutches and neighborhood watch meetings. "There's something strange going on," they had all agreed. "Keep an eye on your pets." But now, standing at her window, Sarah understood the gravity of those warnings. These hawks were not just birds, they were predators, and they were hunting. The hawks' sharp eyes scanned the yard with a predatory intensity. It was as if they were assessing their territory, waiting for the right moment to strike. The scene felt surreal. The hawks, with their wings spread wide, looked majestic and terrifying all at once. Their feathers gleamed in the sunlight, but all Sarah could think about was the potential danger they posed. The sight of the small, lifeless rabbit lying in the grass sent chills down her spine. It was a stark reminder of the brutal reality of nature, a cruel cycle that often left little room for sympathy. Fear began to grip her as she recalled Daisy, her playful little terrier, frolicking in the yard just yesterday. Daisy loved to chase after butterflies, her tiny body darting from flower to flower, oblivious to the dangers that lurked in the shadows. What if the hawks target her next? Sarah thought, anxiety tightening its hold on her. The image of her beloved dog being swooped up by those powerful talons made her stomach turn. She glanced around the kitchen, her mind racing with possibilities. Should she keep Daisy inside? What if the hawks lingered and watched for their opportunity? Sarah felt a mix of determination and desperation as she grabbed her phone, heart racing. She dialed her neighbor's number, hoping for some reassurance. "Linda, it's me, Sarah. Have you seen the hawks in my yard?" Yeah, I noticed them, Linda replied, her voice calm but laced with concern. They've been around here a lot lately. Some of the neighbors think they might be nesting nearby. I'm worried about my cat, Whiskers, too. The conversation only heightened Sarah's fears. She could hear the worry in Linda's voice, mirroring her own concerns. After hanging up, Sarah stood frozen at the window, feeling helpless. The hawks remained vigilant, their powerful wings spread wide as they surveyed the area. The longer she stared, the more she felt that instinctive urge to protect her home and family. A small flutter of movement caught her eye, and she gasped when she realized it was Daisy, prancing happily toward the door leading out to the yard. "No, Daisy!" Sarah shouted, her voice rising in panic. She rushed to the door and called her dog back inside, her heart racing as Daisy paused, head tilting curiously at the sound of her name. "Come here, girl." Daisy trotted toward her, tail wagging, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just outside. Sarah scooped her up, hugging her tightly as she locked the door behind them. "You have to stay inside for a while," she said, her voice shaking. The thought of losing Daisy was unbearable. Sitting on the couch with Daisy curled up beside her, Sarah's mind raced with thoughts. She replayed the events of the past few days, piecing together the puzzle of missing pets and the hawk's sudden appearance. It felt like a dark cloud was hanging over her neighborhood, and she couldn't help but feel that the hawks were a part of it. What if they are hunting more than just rabbits? She whispered to herself, anxiety creeping in. The image of those hawks swooping down from the sky made her heart race. She knew she had to act quickly. "I can't just sit here," she thought, determination replacing her fear. She needed to take action and ensure Daisy's safety, but what could she do? As she considered her options, Sarah grabbed her laptop and began researching hawk behavior. She learned about their nesting habits and hunting patterns. Some articles warned of hawks becoming bolder in urban areas, especially when food was scarce. Could they be looking for easy prey? She wondered. The more she read, the more convinced she became that her small dog could be in serious danger. Sarah decided it was time to call for help. She dialed the local animal control office, hoping they could provide guidance. "Hi, I need to report some hawks that are in my yard," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm really worried about my dog. They might be a threat." The dispatcher listened patiently, assuring her that they would send someone out to investigate. "We get calls like this sometimes," the woman explained. "Hawks can become quite territorial, especially during nesting season." After ending the call, Sarah took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. The hawks were out there, and she had done what she could to protect her home. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of impending doom that loomed over her. She felt the urge to look out the window again, wanting to ensure the hawks were still there, if only to keep a watchful eye on them. She approached the window cautiously, peeking through the curtains. The hawks remained perched on the fence, their fierce eyes surveying the yard with an intensity that made her shiver. The small rabbit lay motionless, a grim reminder of the reality they represented. They really are hunting, she thought, her heart sinking further. A loud call broke through her thoughts, and she gasped as one of the hawks took off, soaring into the sky. The other followed suit, their wings spread wide as they flew overhead, circling the yard. Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What if they come back? What if they're just waiting for the right moment? She quickly shut the curtains, blocking out the sight of the hawks. The world outside felt threatening and menacing. Sarah turned to Daisy, who was blissfully chewing on a toy, unaware of the danger that lurked just outside. "I'll protect you," she vowed, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Time dragged on as she waited for animal control to arrive. Each minute felt like an eternity, and she kept glancing at the clock. The tension in the air was palpable, and she couldn't help but feel that she was in a race against time. The hawks could return at any moment, and she needed to be ready. When the doorbell finally rang, Sarah leaped to her feet, relief flooding her. She opened the door to find 2 animal control officers standing there, equipped with binoculars and other tools. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice shaky but grateful. "Can you show us where the hawks are?" one officer asked, and Sarah nodded, leading them to the backyard. She pointed at the fence where the birds had been. They were just here. I'm worried they're planning to come back for my dog. The officers nodded, taking in the scene. They set up their binoculars and scanned the area. Let's keep an eye on them, one said, glancing at the other. If they're hunting, we might need to intervene. Sarah felt a mix of hope and anxiety as they began their observations. The officers were calm and focused, and she took comfort in their expertise. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on her, but knowing she wasn't alone in this battle made her feel a bit stronger. As they waited, Sarah's thoughts drifted. She felt grateful for the support of her neighbors and the swift response from animal control. She had never considered the idea of birds of prey becoming a threat to her pets, but now it seemed all too real. This experience was a wake-up call, reminding her of the importance of being vigilant in her surroundings. The officers continued to scan the area, taking notes and discussing their observations. It looks like these hawks might be nesting nearby, one officer finally said. We'll need to monitor their behavior and ensure they don't pose a threat to pets in the area. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. While she was glad they were taking action, she knew the hawks were simply following their instincts. They were doing what nature intended, but that didn't make it any less frightening. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the yard, Sarah realized that this experience had brought her community closer together. People had rallied to support one another, sharing their concerns and solutions. She thought of Mrs. Thompson and Linda, both of whom had been just as worried as she was. We need to keep talking about this, she thought, knowing that the issue of hawks and pets would continue to be a topic of concern. If we can find a way to coexist safely, that would be the best outcome. Finally, as the last light of day faded and the evening shadows stretched across the yard, the officers began to pack up their equipment. We'll keep an eye on the situation, one officer assured Sarah. If anything changes, don't hesitate to call us again. With that, they left, and Sarah stood on her porch, watching them go. She felt a sense of calm wash over her as she turned to Daisy, who was now sleeping soundly on the couch. The day had been long and fraught with anxiety, but she had faced her fears head-on. I'm so glad you're safe, she whispered, leaning down to give Daisy a gentle scratch behind the ears. In that moment, she realized how much she loved her little dog and how fiercely she would protect her. The hawks may have been a part of nature, but Sarah knew she would always be on guard to ensure Daisy's safety. As she closed the door to her home, she felt a renewed sense of determination. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Panic surged through Sarah as she retreated into the safety of her home. The hawks outside seemed to dominate her thoughts, their imposing presence weighing heavily on her mind. She knew she had to act quickly to protect her beloved dog, Daisy, and the anxious thoughts swirled like a storm inside her head. Would the hawks come after her pet? What if they had already marked the yard as their hunting ground? With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, her fingers moving swiftly to dial 911. As the call connected, she could hear the calm voice of the dispatcher on the other end. 911, what's your emergency? I have a situation, Sarah stammered, her heart racing. 2 massive hawks have landed in my yard, and I think they might be a threat to my pets. I don't know what to do. The dispatcher's voice remained steady and reassuring. Okay, ma'am, let's take a deep breath. Can you tell me your address and what exactly is happening? Sarah quickly provided her address, trying to keep her voice steady. I live on Maple Street. The hawks are huge. I just found a dead rabbit in my yard, and I'm afraid they might come after my dog. Is your dog outside right now? The dispatcher asked, concern lacing her tone. No, thank goodness. Daisy is inside, but I'm terrified they might get in or that I might accidentally let her out, Sarah replied, glancing nervously at the door leading to her backyard. She could still see the hawks perched on the fence, their sharp beaks and fierce eyes scanning the area as if searching for their next meal. The dispatcher noted the urgency in Sarah's voice. I understand. I'm sending animal control to your location. They'll be able to assess the situation and advise you on how to keep your pets safe. In the meantime, make sure all your doors and windows are securely closed. Thank you, Sarah exclaimed, grateful for the prompt response. She hung up and leaned against the kitchen counter, taking a moment to breathe deeply and steady her racing heart. The situation felt surreal, as if she were living in a nature documentary where the predator was all too close to home. As she stood there, Sarah's mind raced with thoughts about the hawks. Were they just passing through, or had they come to stay? She remembered reading about hawks becoming more common in urban areas as they adapted to find food in cities. What if they made her yard their hunting ground? The idea sent a shiver down her spine. Determined to keep Daisy safe, Sarah decided to check on her dog. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. She walked cautiously to the living room, where Daisy lay curled up on the couch, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking outside. The sight of her little dog filled Sarah with a mix of relief and guilt. "I can't let anything happen to you, sweet girl," she murmured, stroking Daisy's soft fur. As if sensing her tension, Daisy lifted her head, wagging her tail and looking up at Sarah with trusting eyes. It broke Sarah's heart to think that her pet could be in danger. "You just stay here for now, okay?" she said, giving Daisy one last scratch behind the ears before moving back toward the kitchen window. Peering outside, Sarah saw that the hawks had not moved. They seemed to be locked in a watchful stance, their keen eyes scanning the surroundings. The dead rabbit lay in the grass, a stark reminder of the harsh realities of nature. A knot formed in her stomach as she realized how wild animals could become more aggressive when food was scarce. Minutes passed, and anxiety twisted in her chest. She tried to occupy herself with small tasks, checking the locks on the doors, closing the curtains, and pacing the living room, but the worry never left her mind. Every noise outside made her jump, and she couldn't help but glance out the window repeatedly. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the air, cutting through her worry like a knife. Relief flooded over her as she rushed to the front door, opening it just as two animal control officers stepped out of their truck. They wore uniforms emblazoned with the city logo and carried equipment that suggested they meant business. "Ma'am, we received your call about the hawks," one of the officers said, a woman named Officer Jenkins with a friendly smile. "Can you show us where they are?" "Right in the backyard," Sarah said, leading them through the house. Her heart raced with anticipation as they stepped onto the back porch. She gestured toward the fence, where the massive birds still perched, their feathers ruffling slightly in the breeze. "They've been there for a while, and I'm worried they might pose a threat to my dog." Officer Jenkins nodded, taking in the scene. "We'll assess the situation. Sometimes, hawks can be protective of their territory, especially if they're nesting nearby. We want to make sure both you and your pet stay safe." The second officer, a man named Officer Reynolds, pulled out binoculars to get a closer look at the hawks. "Wow, they're big," he remarked, squinting through the lenses. "They might be juvenile red-tailed hawks, but their size can be intimidating." "What should I do?" Sarah asked, her anxiety rising again as she watched the officers observe the birds. "I've heard stories about hawks attacking small pets. Is there a way to scare them off?" "First, let's see how they react," Officer Jenkins replied. "We can try some noise deterrence to see if that encourages them to move on. In the meantime, I recommend keeping Daisy inside until we have a better understanding of the situation." Sarah nodded, feeling a little reassured but still on edge. "I just want her to be safe. She's my baby." "Absolutely," Officer Jenkins assured her. "We take these situations seriously. Let's see what we can do." The officers began setting up some sound devices that would emit loud noises, hoping to startle the hawks. Sarah watched, her heart pounding in her chest. Would this work? Would the hawks just fly away? As the officers tested the devices, the sounds echoed through the yard, resembling a mix of claps and shrill whistles. To Sarah's surprise, the hawks merely tilted their heads, showing no sign of fear. They continued to survey the area, almost as if they were unimpressed with the commotion. Officer Reynolds shook his head. They're pretty stubborn, it seems. Sometimes, hawks get used to noise and ignore it. We might need a different strategy. Sarah felt a wave of frustration wash over her. I just want to protect my dog. I didn't think this would turn into such a big deal. Don't worry, Officer Jenkins said, her voice calm and reassuring. We've dealt with this before. The key is to stay persistent without causing harm to the birds. They're just trying to survive, too. As they continued to work, Sarah felt a surge of determination. She couldn't just stand by and wait for the hawks to leave. Is there anything I can do to help? She asked, her voice firm. Actually, yes. Officer Jenkins replied, smiling at Sarah's eagerness. We could use some more noise, like shaking a can of stones or clapping your hands. Sometimes a little more commotion can do the trick. Okay, I'll get something, Sarah exclaimed, rushing back inside. She rummaged through her kitchen drawers until she found an empty tin can. She filled it with some small pebbles and hurried back outside, her heart racing with hope. As she stepped onto the porch, she shook the can vigorously, making as much noise as she could. Go away, hawks, she yelled, trying to sound as authoritative as possible. The officers chuckled at her enthusiasm, and she felt a sense of camaraderie with them. To her delight, the hawks finally took notice. They shifted on their perches, their heads turning to evaluate the source of the disturbance. The air was thick with anticipation. Would they finally leave? With the combination of the sound devices and Sarah's makeshift noisemaker, the hawks flapped their wings nervously. They took a few hesitant steps closer to the edge of the fence, seemingly debating whether to take flight or stay put. Sarah's heart raced with excitement. Come on, she urged, shaking the can even harder. The hawks finally spread their wings and took off, soaring into the sky. Relief washed over her as she watched them fly away, their silhouettes disappearing into the horizon. See? That did the trick, Officer Jenkins said, clapping Sarah on the back. You were great out there. Sarah felt a rush of triumph. I can't believe that worked. Thank you so much for your help. Of course, Officer Reynolds said, smiling. Just remember, hawks are part of nature, and while they can be intimidating, they usually won't pose a threat if you keep your pets indoors. As they wrapped up their visit, Sarah couldn't help but feel grateful for the community support she had received. She had learned that even the most daunting situations could be tackled with a little teamwork and determination. As she watched the officers head back to their truck, she knew that her yard was safe again, thanks to her quick thinking and the help of animal control. With a newfound sense of confidence, Sarah headed back inside, where Daisy eagerly greeted her, tail wagging and ready for attention. You're safe, girl, Sarah said, scooping her up into a warm embrace. We're going to keep you inside from now on. As they settled down together, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The hawks had been a startling surprise, but they had also reminded her of the beauty and unpredictability of nature. And while she knew that danger could lurk around any corner, she felt empowered to protect her home and her furry friend. The sound of sirens grew louder, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Sarah stood on her porch, anxiously scanning the sky for any sign of the hawks while keeping a watchful eye on her little dog, Daisy. The yard felt like a battleground, and she was determined to protect her furry companion at all costs. The tension in the air was palpable, and her heart raced as she saw the animal control truck pull up to her driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicle, their expressions serious but approachable. Officer Reynolds, a tall man with kind eyes, approached Sarah first. You called about the hawks? He asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety wash over her. Finally, help had arrived. Yes. Thank you for coming so quickly, she said, gesturing toward the yard. They're just over there, on the fence. As they walked toward the edge of her property, she hurried to explain the situation. I found a dead rabbit earlier. I think the hawks might be a threat to my dog. They've been acting strangely, and I'm scared they'll try to grab Daisy. Officer Reynolds glanced up at the hawks, who were now perched high on a nearby tree, their sharp eyes surveying the surroundings. "I understand your concern," he said. "Hawks are known for their hunting instincts, and they've become bolder in suburban areas as they search for food. Let's assess the situation." Officer Lee, the second officer, joined them and began taking notes on a clipboard. "We've received several reports about hawks behaving aggressively in this area," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's not uncommon for them to target small pets, especially if they feel their territory is threatened." As the officers discussed their strategy, Sarah felt a rush of anxiety. What if the hawks weren't easily scared away? What if they decided to make her yard their hunting ground? Daisy, oblivious to the danger, trotted around the yard, sniffing the grass and chasing after a butterfly. Sarah couldn't help but call out, "Daisy, come here, sweetie." She quickly called her dog to her side, feeling the need to keep her close. "Your dog is adorable," Officer Reynolds remarked, watching Daisy. "But we need to make sure she stays safe while we deal with the hawks. If you have a leash, now would be a good time to use it." Sarah quickly attached Daisy's leash, relieved to have her pet close by. The officers began setting up deterrents around the yard, using reflective tape and noise devices that would startle the hawks and encourage them to leave. "We've had success with these methods in the past," Officer Lee explained. "The idea is to create an environment that makes the hawks feel uncomfortable, encouraging them to look for food elsewhere." As the officers worked, Sarah felt a sense of camaraderie. They were all in this together, united by a common goal. She watched as Officer Reynolds and Officer Lee carefully arranged the deterrents, making sure they were placed strategically around the yard. "It's important that we cover all angles," Officer Reynolds said, adjusting the reflective tape to catch the light. "Hawks have excellent vision, so anything shiny or unexpected can help." While they set up the deterrents, Sarah shared her concerns. "I've lived here for years, and I've never seen hawks like this before." "What changed?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Officer Lee paused for a moment, considering her question. "Urban development has played a big role," she explained. "As neighborhoods expand and natural habitats are disrupted, animals like hawks adapt. They become more comfortable in suburban areas, which sometimes leads to conflicts with pets." Sarah nodded, absorbing the information. It was a harsh reality that weighed on her. "I just want to make sure Daisy is safe," she said, glancing down at her dog, who was now sniffing the grass near the fence. "I can't bear the thought of losing her." Officer Reynolds smiled sympathetically. "You're doing the right thing by being proactive. Just keep an eye on her, and we'll do our best to keep the hawks at bay." The reassurance brought a small measure of comfort, but Sarah's heart still raced with concern. As they finished setting up the deterrents, Officer Lee suddenly pointed to the sky. "Look! There they are." The hawks had taken flight, circling above as they monitored the commotion below. Their massive wings spread wide, casting shadows on the ground. Sarah held her breath, anxiously waiting to see what would happen next. "They're watching us," she said, feeling a mix of awe and fear. "I don't like the way they're circling." Officer Reynolds nodded, keeping a close eye on the birds. "We'll make some noise to get their attention and hopefully encourage them to leave. If they see this area as a danger zone, they're less likely to return." With that, the officers began making loud noises, clapping their hands and using a whistle to create a ruckus. The sound filled the yard, and Sarah watched as the hawks hesitated, momentarily startled by the commotion. But then, they quickly regained their composure and continued to circle overhead, seemingly unfazed. Officer Lee muttered, concern creeping into her voice. "It seems they're not reacting as we hoped. They might be too focused on their next meal." Sarah's stomach twisted at the thought. She knew the hawks were skilled hunters, and their determination only heightened her anxiety. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with worry. Officer Reynolds exchanged a glance with Officer Lee. "We'll have to try a different approach," he said. "Let's use some movement to draw their attention away. If we can distract them, it might give us a better chance to scare them off." The officers set up a large, colorful flag on a nearby pole, allowing it to flutter in the wind. The bright colors and movement caught the hawks' attention momentarily, and they swooped lower to investigate. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Maybe this would work. As the hawks drew closer to the flag, Sarah held her breath, praying that their curiosity would pull them away from her yard. The sight of the massive birds gliding gracefully through the air sent shivers down her spine. They were beautiful but dangerous, and she wanted nothing more than to protect Daisy from their sharp talons. Suddenly, one of the hawks dived toward the flag, its sharp beak poised to strike. Sarah gasped, her heart racing as she instinctively pulled Daisy closer. "Look out," she yelled, but the officers stood their ground, focused on the distraction they had created. With a loud snap, the flag fluttered violently in the wind, creating a chaotic spectacle. The hawk hesitated, momentarily confused by the sudden movement. "Come on, let's go," Officer Reynolds shouted, waving his arms and making more noise to keep the hawks on edge. The other hawk circled above, unsure of what to do. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hawks seemed to realize that the yard was not a safe place to linger. With a powerful flap of their wings, they soared into the sky, leaving Sarah and the officers breathless with relief. The officers exchanged triumphant glances, and Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Did we do it?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with hope. "I think we did," Officer Lee replied, smiling widely. The feeling of victory washed over Sarah as she watched the hawks disappear into the distance. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of calm. As the adrenaline began to fade, Officer Reynolds turned to Sarah. "It's important to keep an eye out for any other signs of trouble. If the hawks return or if you see any other wildlife acting strangely, give us a call. We'll be here to help." Sarah nodded, grateful for their support. "Thank you so much for your quick response and for keeping Daisy safe," she said, her voice sincere. With the hawks gone, the officers gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. "Remember to keep Daisy inside for a while, just to be safe," Officer Lee advised. Sarah agreed, knowing she would be extra vigilant in the coming days. As the officers drove away, Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. She looked down at Daisy, who wagged her tail, blissfully unaware of the danger that had just passed. "Looks like we're safe for now, girl," she said, giving Daisy a gentle pat on the head. But as she stepped back inside her house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered. What if the hawks returned? What if other animals were drawn to the area? The encounter had opened her eyes to the unpredictable nature of wildlife, and she knew she had to be prepared. She decided to research hawks and their behavior, wanting to better understand the situation. Sitting down at her kitchen table, she pulled out her laptop and began typing. With every click, she learned more about hawks, their hunting habits, and how to deter them effectively. Hours passed as Sarah immersed herself in her research. She discovered various methods to keep her yard safe, from using reflective objects to hanging noise-making devices. Empowered by her newfound knowledge, she began making a list of items to purchase, determined to protect her home and Daisy. As night fell, Sarah set up some basic deterrents around her yard, feeling a renewed sense of control. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her life. She would take charge and ensure her space remained a safe haven for her family and pets. With a sense of accomplishment, Sarah curled up on the couch with Daisy beside her, ready to watch a movie and unwind after the day's chaos. But in the back of her mind, she remained alert, ever aware of the wild world just outside her door. The afternoon sun hung high in the sky as the animal control officers set to work. Sarah watched with bated breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The hawks circled overhead, their sharp eyes scanning the ground, and she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. It wasn't just about the hawks anymore, it was about safety, her pets, and the reality of living so close to nature. As the officers unpacked their equipment, Sarah approached them. "What are you going to do to keep the hawks away?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. One of the officers, a tall man with kind eyes named Officer Jenkins, turned to her, clipboard in hand. We're going to set up some deterrents around your yard. Things like reflective tape and noisemakers can help scare them off, he explained. Sarah nodded, absorbing the information. Will that really work? She asked, doubt creeping into her voice. Most of the time, yes, Officer Jenkins reassured her. Hawks are smart birds, but they also tend to avoid places where they feel threatened. If they see movement and hear noise, they might decide it's better to hunt somewhere else. He glanced up at the sky, watching as the hawk swooped low, their wings casting shadows on the ground. But we need to act quickly. If they think your yard is a good hunting ground, they might keep coming back. With a plan in motion, the officers began to spread out. Officer Jenkins started attaching reflective tape to the fences and trees, letting the sunlight catch the shimmering material. Another officer, Officer Martinez, set up noisemakers, small devices that would emit loud sounds at irregular intervals. The sound of the devices crackled to life, echoing across the yard, and Sarah flinched at the sudden noise. Do you think this will really work? She asked again, this time her voice softer, tinged with hope. We've had success in similar situations, Officer Martinez replied. But it might take some time. You also need to keep your pets indoors for now, just to be safe. If the hawks see Daisy running around, they might think they have an easy target. Sarah's heart sank at the thought of keeping Daisy cooped up inside, but she knew it was for the best. Okay, I'll bring her in, she said, glancing toward the door where her little dog lay peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding outside. As she opened the door to call Daisy in, Sarah glanced back at the officers. They were working diligently, and she felt a sense of gratitude swell in her chest. Thank you for coming so quickly, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. I didn't know what to do. I thought I'd just have to let nature take its course. Nature is powerful, Officer Jenkins said with a nod. But we can coexist with it. It's important to find a balance. We can't control everything, but we can take steps to protect ourselves and our pets. Daisy trotted inside, wagging her tail and looking up at Sarah with big, trusting eyes. Sarah knelt down to hug her, feeling a wave of comfort wash over her. You're safe now, sweet girl, she whispered, ruffling Daisy's fur. Outside, the hawks continued to soar above, their cries echoing in the air. Sarah's thoughts drifted back to the rabbit they had found earlier, and her heart ached for the little creature that had become a meal for the predatory birds. She knew this was part of nature's cycle, but it was hard to reconcile that with her desire to protect everything she loved. Let's get back to work, Officer Martinez called out, breaking Sarah from her reverie. We'll also monitor the area for the next few days. If the hawks return, we'll be ready. The officers continued setting up the deterrents, and Sarah felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Would this really be enough? Would the hawks leave for good? As she watched them work, she felt a surge of admiration. They weren't just doing their jobs, they were protecting her and her home. After what felt like hours of preparation, the yard was transformed. Shiny tape fluttered in the breeze, reflecting the sunlight, while noisemakers crackled and popped intermittently, sending startled chirps into the air. It's like a carnival in here, Sarah joked lightly, trying to lighten the mood. The officers chuckled, and Officer Jenkins smiled. Exactly. Let's hope it works. If not, we'll explore other options, like contacting wildlife rehabilitators who can help relocate the hawks if necessary. Relocate? Sarah echoed, a flicker of worry crossing her mind. Will that be safe for them? It can be, Officer Jenkins reassured her. Hawks are resilient, and they can adapt to new environments. The goal is to keep them away from residential areas where they pose a risk to pets and children. It's a win-win situation. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah took a deep breath. The chaotic morning had turned into a productive afternoon, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She watched as the hawks continued to circle above, but noticed that they were keeping their distance from the yard. Maybe it's working, she said hopefully, glancing at Officer Martinez. Let's hope so, he replied, his eyes on the sky. But remember, it might take a few days for them to feel completely deterred. Keep an eye on them, and don't hesitate to call us if you see anything concerning. As the officers wrapped up, they packed their equipment and exchanged numbers with Sarah, promising to check in over the next few days. Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. She had a team of professionals looking out for her and Daisy. "Thank you again for everything," Sarah said sincerely as they prepared to leave. "I appreciate it more than you know." "It's our job, but it's also our passion," Officer Jenkins replied. "We love helping our community, and it's always great to see residents like you taking proactive steps to protect your pets and environment." After the officers drove away, Sarah stood outside for a moment, watching the hawks soar high above. The noisemakers continued to crackle, and the reflective tape fluttered in the gentle evening breeze. As she turned to head back inside, she felt a newfound determination. She would do everything in her power to protect her home and her little dog. That night, as Sarah settled on the couch with Daisy snuggled beside her, she reflected on the day's events. She flipped through channels on the TV, but her mind kept drifting back to the hawks and the rabbit. Nature was wild and unpredictable, and she had to respect that. But it didn't mean she had to stand by and let it take away what she loved most. Suddenly, she had an idea. Maybe there was more she could do. She reached for her laptop and began researching hawks, their behavior, and how to coexist with them. She found forums and articles discussing similar situations, and she felt inspired. Perhaps she could help educate her neighbors about the importance of keeping pets safe and being aware of the wildlife around them. By the time she closed her laptop, it was late, but Sarah felt energized. She had a plan. The next day, she would reach out to her neighbors and organize a community meeting to discuss the issue of wildlife encounters. If they worked together, they could create a safer environment for everyone, including the hawks. They could build a community that respected nature while ensuring the safety of pets and children. With a sense of purpose, Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, feeling confident that she could make a difference. The world outside her window was wild and unpredictable, but she was ready to face it head-on. Tomorrow would be a new day, and with it, a new opportunity to take charge of her own life and the lives of those around her. As the days went by, Sarah kept her promise to herself. She organized the community meeting, sharing her experience with the hawks and encouraging others to be proactive in protecting their pets. Many of her neighbors showed up, sharing their own stories about wildlife encounters, lost pets, and their worries about living near such powerful predators. Together, they brainstormed ideas for keeping their pets safe while respecting the natural environment. They talked about creating a neighborhood watch to keep an eye on wandering pets and about sharing information on wildlife in the area. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Sarah felt proud as she watched her community come together, united by a common purpose. The hawks continued to soar above, but they never ventured close to Sarah's yard again. She knew that it was the efforts of the animal control officers, the reflective tape, and the noisemakers that had worked, but she also felt that the community's vigilance played a significant role. Weeks later, Sarah stood outside on her porch, coffee in hand, watching Daisy frolic in the yard. The sun shone brightly, and the sound of laughter filled the air as children played nearby. It was a beautiful day, and Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had turned a frightening experience into an opportunity for growth and education. The hawks remained a part of the landscape, but now they were just another aspect of life in her neighborhood. Sarah had learned to coexist with nature while also advocating for the safety of her community and pets. In doing so, she discovered a newfound strength within herself and a sense of belonging among her neighbors. As she sipped her coffee, she smiled at Daisy, who wagged her tail happily, completely oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded weeks earlier. Sarah knew they were safe now, and that was all that mattered. In the end, it wasn't just about the hawks, it was about community, resilience, and the power of coming together to protect what they loved. The experience had changed Sarah's perspective, and she was grateful for every moment, every challenge, and every lesson learned. And if you like the story, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell.